Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome to episode 54 of Sports Speak. Happy Saturday. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Today is an exciting one. We're going to be previewing the 2021 Major League Wiffleball season, including an exclusive interview with Drew Davis of the Coastal Cobras. The Cobras just took 2 of 3 from the defending champion Great Lakes Gators to begin the 2021 season, so we'll talk to him about that. But before we get into any sort of wiffle ball, let's talk a little bit about some other sports because we haven't really talked to any NBA, MLB, or NASCAR over the last couple of weeks. Quick hitters I just want to get to. First of all, in baseball, Yankees have turned things around for the most part. Boston's still playing really well. Same with Oakland. The Giants are impressing. Dodgers have come back to the pack. And then the Mets had an interesting incident last night, winning the game on a walk-off, but then a weird potential fight between Francisco Lindor and Jeff McNeil in the tunnel, which then they said was because they saw a rat or a raccoon in the tunnel. I don't know what happened, but nonetheless, Lindor has broken out of his slump, and the Mets picked up a big win to get back over the 500 mark. In the NBA, the Nets have dropped 4 consecutive games, albeit against some tough teams, but games they could have won that have slipped away. The Lakers now suddenly find themselves in the 7th seed after a loss to Portland, and right now would have to face the Warriors in the play-in round. Oh, by the way, LeBron James opined for a play-in tournament last year, and now is saying whoever came up with the idea should be fired when he's the one who called for it last year. But now, of course, the Lakers are the team that are in this play-in tournament. And finally, with NASCAR, Kansas Speedway, interesting race, phantom tire caution, which completely screwed over Chris Buescher. NASCAR waited 15 minutes to call the yellow. And then ultimately, a good battle to the end. Kyle Busch gets to victory lane after a lot of cautions in stage 3. Tim, I mentioned a whole bunch of things. What are some points you want to hit on from this past week in sports?
Yeah, obviously the phantom tire caution is a huge one for me because obviously we've talked about in the past about NASCAR's inconsistencies when it comes to throwing yellows. That's been one of the big ones, but definitely as well in terms of baseball. I mean, we're starting to see a transition. I mean, for example, and you mentioned the Yankees at the start of this thing. Yeah, I will say this right now. It feels really good that the Yankees are back above 500 and they're starting to find their rhythm. But I also have to remind you of this. They're not playing good teams. Let's not forget that. They beat the Detroit Tigers, who couldn't play offense if they wanted to. I don't even think they could hit the ocean if they were standing right in front of it. I mean, that team has been abysmal. They were like the Arizona Diamondbacks to start the year with their offense. You know, sure, the Yankees beat the Astros in a series, but it's also not like the Astros were slumping a bit. Sure, they got back to 500. They also lost 7-8 in a row before that stretch. So to me, again, it goes back to the point where Eddie, we talked about this before the year began. The American League continues to be unpredictable. But the one thing that's been the most surprise to me is that the NL East has been underwhelming, really underwhelming this year. I thought this was going to be the division that jumps out. And I'm not saying that they were going to be better than the Dodgers, but I expected this division to arguably be the second best division in baseball. Yet we're looking at teams at 500 or all below in that entire division. Now, granted, all within a good reach of each other because a lot of them have played each other. But the fact of the matter is, at this point in the season, I don't think anyone expected that. And to be honest, I don't think anyone expected teams like Philly to have the upper edge early on.
Yeah, it's been a weird year, especially since so many teams were hyped up. There would be all these playoff contenders from the National League East, and all these teams are borderline 500, and each have really glaring issues. The Braves, their offense has been a mess other than Acuna and Freddie Freeman. The Mets, of course, they can't score with runners in scoring position, and their starting rotation beyond the top 3 has been putrid, to say the least. Hopefully they can get a couple of starters back down the line, but now Carlos Carrasco was put on the 60-day injured list, so he's not eligible to return until Memorial Day weekend, and they still don't have Noah Syndergaard, still don't have Seth Lugo, so some holes there. The Phillies, their bullpen is still as bad as it was last year. The Marlins are not having this season. They're not following up their playoff appearance, and then Washington just has so many glaring holes and have dealt with tons of injuries already, especially to their starting rotation. It's been a weird year, but I mean, we're accustomed to this, Tim, in the Major League. leagues, it feels like you'll see teams that get off to these crazy starts in the first month, and then they'll kind of settle back into how we expected them to perform. I can see that happening with Kansas City. They've actually started to come back to the pack now after they got swept in 4 games at home by Cleveland. But something else I wanted to talk about in the majors is this onslaught of no-hitters that we have seen. We're now up to 4 actual no-hitters, technically 5 with Madison Bumgarner's 7-inning no-hitter. But regardless, whether it's 4 or 5 in the first month, we've never seen that in baseball before, even back in 1968, which is considered the year of the pitcher. So do you think, of course, I've seen how like the Atlantic League, for example, and some minor leagues are considering moving back the mound a little bit. Hitters are still getting home runs, even though the ball isn't juiced like it was in past years, and they're still hitting for average, but the tremendous amount of strikeouts and all these no-hitters, do you think the major leagues are going to have to make some sort of change here with pitching going forwards?
To me, you could test out and try to advance the game as much as you can, and I'm glad they're doing that in the Atlantic League. But to be honest, no. In terms of the certain rules to try to speed up the game and re-revolutionize this game overall to the modern era, I could see being pushed forward, but moving the mound back, not really one of them. I mean, you're taught from day one, and it's been this way for years. 60 feet to home plate if you're pitching, 90 feet to first base, and you're going 90 feet at a time. Not saying that moving the mound back's a problem, but you change the whole concept of a game. And not that it's a full relearning, but you're either making a job now different for a pitcher, or you're making it even more different for a hitter's perspective. And listen, I understand Major League Baseball right now in this era where they love offense. But quite frankly, and as we've seen, 4 no-hitters, and I still will count Madison Bumgarner's 5th, even though it's not official at this point in the season. It is remarkable. But I think the even more remarkable fact, Eddie, and, I've picked up on this trend multiple times, but if you notice, it's average, if not below average pitchers that just tend to find it one day and throw a no-hitter. For example, Wade Miley, Carlos Rodon, right? He turned around and he threw a no-hitter. Goodness, who's the other 2 this year? You had
John Means.
Means, okay, I'll give this. Means, when he is on it, he could be a top 10 pitcher in the American League, and that's even maybe even better. I truthfully think John Means is a very talented pitcher on an underwhelming team. And you look at it throughout the years. Yes, we haven't had a perfect game since 2012. Sure, we haven't had as many no-hitters, but I think the fact of the matter is that this recent trend, we've just been seeing a bunch of guys have it that are mediocre pitchers getting lucky on a good day. And I'm not saying that's why it's happening, but those guys are having their stuff. The fact of the matter is, I just want to see if we can finally get a perfect game. If we can get a perfect game, that would be great. Because baseball hasn't had 9 years. And we almost also, as well, Sean Manaea yesterday came close to a no-hitter. We almost, for the first time since 1990, the second time in baseball history, had 2 no-hitters in one day. So right now, I'm kind of liking how it is because there's a balance. The only thing I still don't like is the extra inning rule. I think, and by the way, we almost saw that last night in the Reds game with Wade Miley. The Reds scored at the top of the 9th. Had they not, there's a potential chance Wade Miley could have lost that game in the 10th and still not allowed a single hit. So there's a lot of things that really could have came to play yesterday with these other rules that Major League Baseball enforced. But, I mean, again, you could test a couple of things out. I just don't really think the moving the mound back, it's bad enough. It already puts enough stress on a pitcher's arm to throw 60 feet. Now you're going to ask him, and I'm not saying it's going to kill him to throw, maybe 2 or 3 more feet further, but it does take a lot more stress. And I understand you're trying to knock down velocity and so on. But again, this is a skills game. It's reactionary. That's what baseball is. And, you're asking for a lot and probably going to ask for more injuries, which, by the way, also are up again this year. If you look at statistics, over 25%. Throughout the first 2 months. So to me, it's about the player safety in this regard.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of mediocre pitchers like Wade Miley. I remember a few years ago in the playoffs, I believe when he was with Milwaukee, when he threw a 4-pitch walk to Chris Taylor to start the game, and then Craig Counsell just took him out in the first inning. These are not really these star pitchers. It's not these common names that are throwing these, but you think about even in the past with those perfect games, like when Dallas Braden pitched one in Oakland, and they do go through these stretches. Think about 2010 and 2011, like I believe there were 4 perfect games over like a 2-year stretch. Like it happens. But you mentioned something, and it's an example. It's very rare, but these rule changes can sort of contradict some of these traditional baseball, rules and customs. Like I was considering a situation like John Means, for example. John Means, by the way, almost had a perfect game. It was a dropped third strike that the runner ended up reaching base that ended up preventing him from having that perfect game. But let's say, for example, Wade Miley had a perfect game through 9 innings and he didn't get that run support. And let's say it's the bottom of the 10th. They put a runner at second. He gets 2 fly ball outs. It moves the runner home. He pitches a 9 2/3 inning perfect game, but loses. That's very possible with this current format. Not saying it would happen, but these are types of things where the new baseball rules sort of contradict with what we currently understand. And we understand also that baseball will be going over a lot of change over these next couple of years as they sort of adapt and adjust. And we know there's a new CBA coming, but I think certain things like this have to be looked at. One last thing, we didn't get a chance to, and I know it's a little past it now, but the NASCAR race at Talladega, one thing that did happen, Joey Logano had a bit of a scary flip, sort of looked like Elliott Sadler 20 years ago, a blow over on the backstretch. Fortunately, didn't get hit by anybody else, but was very adamant right afterwards about the danger that the current super speedway racing has. And he's drawn a lot of criticism for that. Larry McReynolds, for example, saying that he's been coming to Talladega since 1980, and no matter what kind of car it is, you'll see cars go upside down like that. It's the only thing that's the same as a driver and a steering wheel. So there's a big debate with this. Also, Joey Logano was kind of shook up. It was the first time he had flipped in like 13 years. Do you think that there are concrete changes that need to happen to the plate package? Or has NASCAR really just exhausted all its options that it has here, and this is just simply a product of going 200 miles an hour on a track?
Well, I don't want to get too far in depth because obviously I know Drew's going to be coming on in a couple moments, but the way I look at it is this in terms of what NASCAR is doing right now. And if I'm being honest, Eddie, there is no fix for it. Now, think about this just for a moment. Back in the Car Tomorrow era, we had 2-car tandeming, which, yes, the fans loved, found it to be very strategic. But what was the problem with that? Yeah, the field got separated out. There was less big wrecks, but the cars went so much faster. And as a result of the cars going so much faster, and sure, you can knock down horsepower, but the cars went so much faster, you end up getting the result of what happened to Carl Edwards, flying into the catch fence, and that resulted in them making the catch fence even higher. Now, NASCAR, as a result, too, with a bunch of flips with the Car Tomorrow package outside of Carl Edwards, said, all right, we're gonna slow down the horsepower a little bit. Where NASCAR is stuck in between decision right now is this. Would you rather have a big wreck and increase the chances of driver safety, believe it or not, because all those blows off other cars actually reduce potential impact? Or would you rather risk a hard blow to the outside wall, separated, and potential massive injury, maybe to fans, maybe to a driver? Because the fact is this, yes, you can go faster. Tandem racing is great, but once you slow down these cars, you have no choice. They have to pack race. They have to be there. We mentioned all these big wrecks. NASCAR is kind of in between. There's no down the middle. You speed up the cars, sure, they spread out, but then you have the same problem again. Cars are going to flip. You can't prevent that. I mean, every single car we've been in, remember, the Car Tomorrow era was great because everyone was almost saving these cars in an instant. But Ryan Newman definitely explored the fact that you can flip that car a bunch at Talladega. And if it wasn't just Carl Edwards, NASCAR has made fixes. Credit their safety system. I'm not discrediting Logano's point about safety, that I do agree NASCAR could get safer, and it stinks that bars collapsed in on him to his helmet. But you're not going to stop a car, especially, I hate to tell you, with this next generation. And I'm not saying iRacing is a perfect picture, but for example, I can go 180 miles per hour in reverse in the car, and that car can pick up air. imagine going front. You're going to pick up air regardless. And NASCAR is starting to go a direction where I'm not saying it's going to be like IndyCar and Formula One, but in terms of suspension, it's a very similar dynamic. If you're just a little bit off balance and you spin, you're going to go flying. You really will go flying. So the fact of the matter is, NASCAR can't really do much. This current plate package, I think, is honestly the safest way you can do it at this point without risking lives of your spectators and without risking lives of your drivers. Because once you try to spread out the barriers, and we've seen over the years, and we can't even just forget the car tomorrow era. How about years ago when cars were going 220 and they were flipping on their own? And yes, I get they were a lot less aerodynamically advantaged to where we are today. But the fact of the matter is, cars will do that again. So you're better off dealing with the big wrecks and what you have now than settling for something that could be disastrous because you want spread out racing that wasn't designed for super speedways. I do applaud NASCAR in the system, and I will say it's the one point that they've been consistent on. Sure, you can make a couple of rules to maybe adjust the aggressive blocks or limit pushing, but at the end of the day, everyone's trying to push to win. That's what makes Talladega and Daytona so well. There's not much you can do about it. I mean, maybe the double yellow line, but horsepower and so on. You can't keep limiting and changing these up and over because it becomes a different race in the same story year after year.
Yeah, and drivers need time to adjust to a new package. And you see every time they try something new, there's usually big wrecks because there's a learning curve, even for these Cup guys who have so much experience behind the wheel. And you know what? Yes, this was an unfortunate, it was also a very fluky wreck with the weird push. Logano just was going straight on and just got completely turned the other way. And then, something like that when you're going 200 miles an hour, there's really no way you can change something in the car to make it not get up in the air, even with roof flaps, even with any sort of safety procedures. And you know what? It wasn't a terrible wreck. It was a bad flip. It was a hard landing on the roof. But other than that, fortunately didn't get hit by anybody else. He was shaken up, and it's hard for us, to try to speak on his behalf because we weren't in the race car, but you got to understand that this is a product of the sport, and there is a level of danger in motorsports. And fortunately, other than the Ryan Newman scare over the past 20 years or so, knock on wood, there really hasn't been any issues in NASCAR with really life-threatening crashes. And even the scariest accidents, Michael McDowell at Texas, Austin Dillon, Daytona, they've been able to walk away unscathed because of the safety that NASCAR has continued to progress upon. And the fact that they've done this much in 20 years, that just 20 years ago, Dale Earnhardt unfortunately died in a crash that, looking at it years later, you'd think that wasn't really that big of a hit. And you see so many of these crashes that seem way worse now, and these drivers walk away just fine. Just think about the continued progress NASCAR is going to be able to make going forwards. It's not easy to control cars that are going 200 miles per hour, and slowing them down is not necessarily going to save things. And all that's going to do is drive away fans that want to see cars go fast. So that being said, hard to really, go against Joey Logano because he's the one that was actually in the car, and it's his input and the other driver's input that is centrally important when NASCAR is addressing safety and such. But you got to understand, if you look back at any highlights, 60 years ago, you had two cars in the Daytona 500 go flying over the fence. Like, this is not something new, and this is not something just because of the style of the car. This has happened forever. Anytime you go to Daytona or Talladega, there's the potential with all the energy that's built up in the pack or from the pushing or just from going at a high rate of speed at a track that you don't get off the throttle and you don't lift. Like, it's just the name of the game. But like, that's what you got to understand here. And honestly, I feel like this package right now, it's not terrible. When you think about it, these wrecks haven't, after the Newman incident, when they adjusted things, think about last year's Talladega race and this year's Talladega race. Other than last fall with that one big wreck with Kurt Busch getting up in the air, we've had 3 Talladega races with really one big crash collecting a lot of cars. And we want to see big packs at the end. Of course, the Daytona 500 was frustrating with a wreck that happened so early in the race, but it's nice to see this happening and getting to see so many cars out there at the end battling for the win. Because really, as a fan, and I think maybe you and a lot of other people could agree, much rather see 30 cars contending for the win than 6 with 3 of them filled with tape.
Well, yeah, I'd much rather see 30 than 6. But, I think David Reagan, if you saw it on Twitter, brought up a very good point in regards to how this all ended up working out. Drivers push to the limits. It's not necessarily the cars. NASCAR has done such a good job to this point, making drivers as safe as possibly can be. They adjust the systems based upon what the drivers want, and they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Needless to say, at this point, you're not flipping cars because of the fact that NASCAR is failing with the system. Daytona and Talladega, and maybe occasionally Kansas with their hard hits, are typically the only tracks we see cars even get off the ground for the most part. So to me, NASCAR is doing a lot better of a job aerodynamic wise, keeping these cars on the ground. And again, it's always going to be a part of racing. But the fact of the matter is, again, at Talladega, Daytona, this is going to be evident. At the high speeds, it is always going to be possible. A hard hit is going to always be possible. NASCAR always has to be ready in regards to, an odd angle, hitting an inside wall, or maybe hitting a spot that no one's ever hit in the outside wall to try to adjust and make that spot, let's say, even safer. But, yeah, we have a big wreck. It stinks. It really does hurt, especially we saw it at Talladega, where guys like, I'm a big Alex Bowman supporter, got wrecked because he got pinned between his own teammates from an incident that he didn't even start as a result of a lap car and his teammate getting aggressive. That stinks. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, it could have been a lot worse. There could have been, for example, Ross Chastain, or not a lot of people forget this. Chastain coming to the line, right? He got loose. He did something that happened to Kyle Busch, if you remember, pounded the inside wall. Car was on a direct angle, couldn't slow down. Ross Chastain comes out okay. Remember, Kyle Busch broke his legs. So you can't say NASCAR's safety system is failing. The drivers push to the envelopes. You look at the playoff races. Remember when Alex Bowman made that big block? And I'll talk about it over and over again because that was a pivotal point in terms of restrictor plate racing and that old package. That was a problem. Cars coming at you 20 miles an hour faster. Bowman throws a block, goes all the way onto the apron, can't handle it, comes back up in front of the field. Mm-hmm. That's on Bowman. That is on Bowman with the way you throw blocks. And that's also on Logano for going 20 miles an hour and, saying, all right, well, he blocked and not lifting early on in the race. And I'm not saying that he has to and he's obligated to, but the point is the drivers test the envelopes. They push them to the limit. At some point, we have to sit back and realize this is all on the drivers for the results we're getting on the track and the over-aggression we see at a plate race. And I understand that, fans hate single file lines because drivers lack patience, but it's true. These drivers want to go everywhere every single lap, but they're not patient enough, which is why we have single file lines. So at some point, we have to accept that fact and realize that no matter what system you have, this is going to continue to be prevalent and it's not going to be fixed.
Absolutely. But we're going to shift gears. It's just about time for our Major League Wiffleball season preview. We've got 2 interviews coming up. We'll first be joined by Coastal Cobras manager and pitcher Drew Davis, and then we'll be joined by Ben Haller, who's a reporter for the Major League Wiffleball, to further preview the season. So stay with us here on Sports Speak. So here we go, MLW season preview time, and what better way to start it off than the manager of the team that won 2 of 3 in the opening series, Drew Davis. Thanks for joining us here on Sports Speak.
Thanks, man. What's up? What's going on with you, bro?
I'm doing good. So I want to talk about, first of all, this draft pick. Of course, in the draft, you got 2 picks this year after the trade with the Gators. Of course, there's been a lot of criticism with the Gators winning the World Series, but at least you proved some of those doubters wrong with those great 2 games to kick off the series. Brandon Baranowski, and then, of course, the legendary Gus, the 8th pick in the draft. Both of them making their debuts. Overall, just take us through how you feel about those first 2 games and winning 2 of 3 here against the defending champs.
Yeah, I mean, the first 2 games, they felt super good. I personally just felt really good at the plate. I made a change to my swing. I'm sure if you went back and watched the last year's video and watch this year's video, it's a pretty clear change. And I think it helped a lot. And that was I felt locked in. And I think the team was were just carrying my energy over. I had shotgunned a Red Bull right before, so I was feeling pretty gnarly. I think like the one thing I would just say about it is I saw a lot of people like really hating on Brendan Barron. And I don't think that was really like a fair thing for him, just because basically what happened was, I'll do like a little bit of explaining because it happens every series. It's why I don't like pitching game threes. It's why I like other teams, like you'll see like their aces do games 1 and 3 instead of 1 and 2. But I always do 1 and 2 because I hate pitching game threes. And the reason is we use one ball the entire series. And after about game 2 or like this series, once it's been hit enough and been in the dirt enough, the scuff's still in. And so the ball doesn't move like it does freshly scuffed. And it's really hard to get a grip on how it's going to move. And so you can see like a lot of my pitches, like they just stay flat. And that's why I was throwing a lot of balls and walking people. And so that's why I put Barron in. I knew like he had been a fast pitch whiffler. And I was like, he's more reliant on accuracy and like speed. So he won't be as reliant on movement. So that's why I put him in. And I mean, the ball just got to him. So I don't blame him for any of that, any of the walks. Like I was telling him during the game, like, this isn't your fault. Let's just try and get out of this inning like as easily as possible. And the other, like the Gators knew it too. Like me and Chris actually had asked Kyle before the third inning. We said, hey, can we change this ball? This ball is like getting really bad. And he was like, no, we'll change it in the third game, which has never happened. Like we never do that. We always only stick with one ball, but it was getting to the point like we needed to change it. And that's why that third inning was just so sloppy. Like even the Gators, like you could see like Chris was having trouble in the third inning, having some control issues. So I'm just really glad that we were able to come through with a win, because it would have been a shame if we went up 7-0 and would have lost that. So I'm just glad we won that game. And game 3, like obviously I wish we could have won, but just winning 2 of 3 was more than I could ask for. And I'm really excited. I'm actually like, honestly, like, I don't know if you knew, Eddie, but I had told like, I think two of the other analysts, I actually wasn't sure if I was going to be playing. I had a couple of nagging injuries going on. And it wasn't until the drive there, actually, I decided I was going to play, because I had told my team like I wasn't playing. And I texted Gus on the way there. I was like, I need you to go to Dick's and pick up BioFreeze for me, because I'm not going to be able to play without it. And he was like, all right, bet. And so that happened. So I'm just really glad we got the 2 dubs. It was huge for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, the fact that you weren't even sure if you were going to be able to play and to be able to excel so well and get that big win against the defending champs, really cool to see. Tim, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, for you last year, you looked at a .185 batting average. I think it was 3 home runs, 8 RBIs. And you look at this first series, and you found a way, especially to come up clutch there in that second game after, blowing the 7-0 lead, as you mentioned. I mean, obviously you talked about you made some adjustments, but how much more did you focus, at least during this past offseason, on improving your offensive game? Because you mentioned, to your point, you were so locked in, and it just looked like you were such a hard out at the plate.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not gonna lie. Last year, that was the first year I had not played baseball before wiffle ball. And because I was not playing baseball anymore, I think I really struggled with that. Just because I wasn't seeing balls regularly. But this year, because I'm trying to go play again, I've been playing baseball, so I've been seeing pitching. So this wasn't the first time I had seen pitching. Granted, it wasn't a baseball, it was a wiffle ball, and it moves a little bit different. But just like seeing something come towards you and trying to hit it, I just felt like it helped a lot. And again, that swing change, it worked. Like basically what happened was I always had a very different swing from wiffle ball and baseball. It was kind of what, like when some people didn't play wiffle ball because they were like, oh, I don't want it to ruin my swing. That's why Tommy like stopped playing a couple years ago, and that's why a couple other baseball players have been like, I don't want to play. So I always just made my swings very different from each other because I didn't want to confuse them. And like when I went to baseball, I knew like that was my baseball swing. I went to wiffle ball, that was my wiffle ball swing, but I made my wiffle ball swing more like my baseball swing, and it just helped literally a ton. Like you can see, I felt so much more confident at the plate. Like even getting down 2 strikes, I was like, if this ball is in the zone, like I can get to it. Unlike last year, it was like, oh, if I get down, I can't get down. That's why I was swinging so early. This year, I wasn't swinging. I mean, I was swinging. I was being aggressive, but like I knew when to be aggressive. And also like Sean was hitting a lot too. Like, so he really set the tone by, I think it was the first game. Like I got that base hit, and then he followed it up with his classic down the line base hit. Andy was a hard out at the plate. I really think that our lineup is the best lineup in the league, no doubt. I think like you're going to see throughout this year, pitchers are going to struggle just trying to get through our lineup because the depth of it is literally insane. Like I don't see another team that has even close to the depth of a lineup that we have, where every person is an immediate threat to score runs like ours is. And that's something that I like look at this year and I love. And that was something we wanted to work on. And honestly, like I'm going to be really honest with you guys. Like we didn't have a single practice before that game. So like when you said like, how have you guys worked on your offensive game? It was literally like we showed up to the field and we were like, looks like we got to turn it on. Like it's go time. Like we haven't done this since last August. I hadn't even thrown a wiffle ball since last August, since our last game. And so we kind of just looked at each other and we're like, we're just going to have to find a way to win. And that's what we did. So I'm really glad like on the offensive side that we were able to like, because that was the one thing I felt like last year we didn't do as bad as people thought. Because we were getting people on base. We just weren't doing like what you said. Like we weren't able to hit them in when we needed to. Like the amount of runners we left stranded last year was astronomical. Like we were always having runners on first, second, and third. Like we were always having bases loaded and never being able to hit them in. And so I think that was the difference this year is we were just able to hit them in, which was just very refreshing to see.
Yeah,
absolutely. I apologize.
Go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to ask one more question in regards to, obviously, you get a guy like Brendan Baranowski who you could tell just has it at the plate, and obviously you get that big walk-off hit. I do want to look from outside, not just a game perspective, but maybe you can go in a more independent aspect. How do you guys look at players? You guys look through tournaments and so on to, add stuff on throughout the draft, or how does that process work?
I can. Yeah. So, well, with Brendan, I had gone. So last year I didn't go to the Michigan or the Wiffle in the Mitten tournament. So I went this past year, but the year before. It's part of the reason why I didn't pick anyone in the draft last year, because I didn't really get to see anybody. I'd never seen Chris Cheatham actually play. And so I didn't feel comfortable like actually picking him. That's why that was one of the reasons I traded what I picked. So this year I was like, I need to go to the Wiffle in the Mitten tournament. So I went and I kind of asked Kyle before, like, I'm like, who are some teams like I should be watching? And I go, hey, is that team that won last year here? And that was Brendan's team. So Brendan's team won the Wiffle in the Mitten tournament. And he was like, yeah, they're going to be here. So I kind of went and watched that team. And oh my gosh, everyone on their team was good. Like they were just hosing people down in the tournament. And so I kind of knew at that moment, I was like, and we connected a lot. Like we really got along, and I could tell like he'd be a really good fit with our team. I don't think a younger guy would have fit super well with our team. Just because like me and Andy are obviously very close knit because we've known each other since age 6. Sean and I are very close knit because we've been in a ton of classes together. So I think we really needed someone that was like our age, at least for this year, because this was like our World Series window for me. Like I was like, we need to get the best player we can that's going to help us right now. We don't need someone that's going to help us in 3-4 years. So when I was at that tournament, I like was kind of looking around, and there were some younger players I was impressed with, but I was like, Brendan's our guy. Like he is striking out people consistently. The only thing I was worried about was the speed change. Like he is used to throwing as hard as he can. And that was one thing he did say about game 2. He's like, yeah, I was having a lot of trouble, 1 with the ball, 2, like trying to figure out how hard I can throw and still be effective without going over the speed limit. And that's why like game 3, I was really proud of him. Like he really like stepped up game 3, and he had some gnarly pitches. We're just gonna have to work on getting those. Like he has a really good drop. Like there's one drop in game 3 that we caught on video that I literally looked at Andy, and you can kind of see it in the background. I look at Andy and just go like, like my jaw dropped. I was like, that's a great pitch. So as long as we can like kind of develop those into more accurate, more consistent strikes, I think he's gonna be really good. Now Gus, on the other hand, Gus is a little bit different story and how we got Gus. Down in the Illinois tournament this year, he was on Norp's team, and we just got along super well. And a lot of people are going to give me hate for not picking kind of picking like a meme as our last pick. And I can kind of get into my thought process on that because I think that is important. Basically, what was going on in my head is I did not want to pick another player that had an opportunity that might have an opportunity at another team to play full time, because going into the season, my mindset's like I have Andy, me, Flynn, and Barron, and like those are my 4 guys. I don't need a 5th guy who's going to ride the bench all year, maybe get in one series and pitch like one game. I don't want to do that to someone, because if they have the opportunity to go be like a backup or like an ace for another team, I'm not just going to keep them on my team just to sit there and be a reserve. So I picked Gus just because we got along so well, and I knew we needed someone. One of the things that like our team is notorious for struggling with is once things get down, it's like we just like when things are high, like we're riding the highest highs, but when things get low, we really sink into that mentality. So like I was like, we need Gus to just like, we need someone to keep us grounded, and so that's what he's there for. And he's also kind of helping with. Sometimes I get a little bit too into the game, and I have a hard time distinguishing like what's a good manager move, what's a good player move. Like, should I sub myself out from pitching? Should I put another pitcher in? So Gus is like a good person who's like, I can be like, hey, do you think it's a good idea for me to come out, or should I stay in? Because like I've struggled with that in the past. Like, for example, 2017 game 3 World Series, putting Jack in. I'm sure if Gus was there at that time, he'd be like, you need to pitch. Like, don't put Jack in. There's no point. So that's what he's there for. Just because I don't need a 5th player that's just going to ride the bench all game. But that's how I found him. He's one of Norp's friend, and we had gotten along super well. So I added him to the squad. And he's actually not that bad. Like he almost pimped a bomb off me in the Illinois tournament, so he can hit. And we're gonna put him in. Like you saw, he got in game 3, so he's gonna get some chances. But yeah, he's kind of just there for team morale.
Yeah, and you have a bigger roster, and 5-player roster. You also had a 5-player roster back in 2017 when you ended up going to the World Series, and having this diverse roster and having someone else in Baranowski who can pitch is also key as well, because you mentioned it in the past. You've had, of course, beyond you, there's been questions about who the number 2 starter will be for the Coastal Cobras, and having someone else you can trust. And being completely honest, it was a messy 3rd inning. You already alluded to it, but after that, 4 innings for him, he only allowed the 1 home run to cheat him. I mean, he was pitching really well, and I feel like that's something good to look forward to. But last question here, just 3 games in, you've already had to face off with the Gators, who are a tough test. But something else just for people to think about is, there's been so many critics, and I've been a critic as well of the decision last year to trade away the pick. But you know what? The Gators picked 2 guys, and they won the World Series. Now you pick 2 guys. You have a stacked roster. We'll see what can happen from here. But what teams do you think will be the biggest obstacles going through this season for you guys?
Biggest obstacles. Wow. Honestly, I think the biggest obstacle is literally whoever we play in our second series. I forget who it is. I think it's either the Wildcats or the Eagles. And the only reason I say that is just I don't think it matters which team it is. It's just because you look at the teams like we have to play this. We have the hardest schedule of any team. We have to play the 2 best, and well, some people may say the Eagles aren't the best like team in the NL, but they do have the best pitcher of all of those teams. And I know that we have always struggled against the Eagles. I don't think we've ever won a series against the Eagles like since I've been a player. So the only reason I say like whoever the team next is because I value every other team we play this year the same. It's just we have always struggled. We always come out opening day and perform. There's been a couple years obviously we haven't, but I mean look at last year. We swept the Diamondbacks. The year before we swept the Mallards. I think, or we swept the Gators, and then we swept the Mallards for that. So something we've always struggled with is that second series is carrying that over. So I think if we can win in the next series, whether that's a sweep, whether it's 2-1, I think that is the most important thing. I don't care what team it is. It could be the Preds, the Magic, the Eagles, the Wildcats. As long as we win a series, I think that's super important for us, because I think we're good enough roster wise. If you look at our team, I think we're like a top 3 team. It's just like, can we put it together? So in terms of obstacle, it's just like really whoever we play next, because as long as we beat that, if we beat the Wildcats, we can beat the Preds. If we can beat the Preds, we can beat the Wildcats. So that's like where I'm at. So it's kind of just like, can we put it together for a full season? Because we never have. We've always even 2017, we didn't put it together until the end of the season. And then there's been other years where we put it together in the beginning and then we can't finish it out. So we just need to be able to do it for a full season.
Well, it's going to be a real battle. And just like they say every year, and I think it once again holds true, this might be the best season yet of Major League Wiffleball. We're really excited to see what's to come. Drew Davis, Coastal Cobras, best of luck. And thanks so much for joining us today on Sports Speak.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me, Eddie.
All right, so final segment of the day. Thank you so much to Drew Davis for joining us there to give us some insight on that series. I never really thought about, for example, what he was saying about how they just use the one wiffle ball per series typically, and that had become such a mess with the rain, and that kind of caused all that chaos. But to, dive a little more into the series and into the season, we're going to be joined by one of the top MLW analysts out there, Ben Haller. Thanks so much for coming on today on Sports Speak.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so before we talk about anything else, of course, that was a wild series, and it all starts with Game 2. Brendan Baranowski's first pitching appearance wasn't too good. 13 runs allowed in 1 inning. Then he settled in after that. But the big grand slam by Drew Davis, the Cobras prevailing, it shows the Coastal Cobras are really strong. And like I said to Drew just before this, you think about the Gators. They drafted 2 players in 2020, got them to the World Series. The Cobras are going to be criticized on missing out on Chris Cheatham, but you know what? They picked 2 guys. They both fit in and fill some really important roles on that team. And now they've got a big, talented roster of 5 that can contend. What do you make of this series between the Cobras and Gators?
Well, I think it's a perfect example of what's going to be really interesting going forward in this season. And what we've seen so far, the more, we have 8 new players in the MLW, at least 8 new players in the MLW every year. And you also have some more free agents. And that's more than there ever has been since before 2020 with this new draft. And what that's going to bring up is the manager's going to have a lot bigger of a role decision-making wise. And you saw Drew Davis made a big manager decision, and it ended up not costing them too much because they won. But they gave up 13 runs in that inning when he brought Baranowski in. So there's a couple things to play into it. They have a strong roster of 5. Now, what's going to be interesting is teams start to get more players, more talented players with all these rookies. And the numbers show that it's definitely more effective to only play 3 guys in your roster. That's what MLW history shows. So it's going to be interesting what he does going forward. I know the first 2 games he played 4 guys, and because you're not going to sit Flynn and Durand, and then you got to get someone like Baranowski, who has one of the brightest futures in the league. You got to get him some games. So it's going to be interesting. But talent-wise, the Cobras looked really good, especially at the plate. You can make that 4-man roster work when all 4 are hitting and getting on base, and that's what they showed. So,
well, we look at that first series too, and obviously staying on topic with the Coastal Cobras, they came into the season projected around 7th in the preseason rankings, and obviously to knock off the defending champion in a 3-game series is relatively huge. But looking at it, Ben, from this first series, and again, I don't want to jump to a conclusion because there's so many more to go, but is it fair to say early on that the Cobras may be better than what they were initially anticipated to be?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely – I think Cobras just had a rough year last year, and a lot of that stems from Drew Davis, his command issues. He couldn't find the strike zone. That cost him a few games. And Drew Davis is a guy that it got to him mentally, and he's the leader of that team. And when he kind of went down mentally, that's when the team started to go down with him. And everyone knew they're way better than what their record showed last year. They were definitely – you look at them compared to the Magic, and they're the better team. Magic showed that. Magic showed they were better. They performed better. But I think – definitely they're better than what people expect just because just a down year last year.
Yeah, so let's shift gears out of that series, looking at the rest of the MLW, and let's talk about my favorite team, the Midwest Mallards. Now, there's a lot of changeover here. Noah Dabber co-retired. Wasn't much of a factor last season, but the Mallards had a lot of issues, particularly with scoring runs. They did not have a single home run in their first 8 games of the season last year, and they could not really convert with runners on base. Tommy Coughlin was a solid pitcher, but just wasn't getting any run support and wasn't helping himself with the bat, and we know how talented the National League is with the Eagles, the defending champion Gators, and the Diamondbacks continuing on the rise. What do you see happening here with the Mallards, with their draft pick Caden Irwin, and what we can see from this team going forwards?
Yeah, the Mallards are in a little bit of trouble, at least this year. Little head scratcher for me when in the power rankings. I think there were 6. They're heading forward for me. They're going to be power rankings 8th place, just because they're so young and they do have a little bit of a future. But Coughlin's been struggling on the mound a little bit, and they definitely don't have enough hitting it just yet. You got to see how Irwin does. Johnny Bean, he had that breakout season in 2019, but we didn't really see much of that last year in 2020. Trevor Bonham showed some potential, but definitely not all there yet. So the Mallards don't have enough firepower, and like you said, no home runs for the first 8 games for them last year. So it's going to be interesting to see what they can do, but I would not expect a lot from them this year.
When we look at this year too, obviously the Mallards have been a team that, again, they've gone up and down. And again, you mentioned the lack of home runs throughout those first 8 games. But is it safe to say the teams that are going to do well early on this season are going to be the teams that are just hitting so well offensively and seeing the ball throughout this diverse time, at least in terms of weather and so on?
I'd say, yeah, early on, because hitting home runs and being able to get on base is something that sets the tone. This is the second year that we have the new rule of 6-inning limit rule. So it's going to be interesting what teams can do against those second pitchers. And we saw that, the Preds went from, they had the same exact roster from 2019 to 2020 from a World Series champion to kind of a mediocre team last year. And a lot of that's due to they didn't have a second pitcher. They brought Swanson in, who was all right on the mound, but we know Warda has been struggling on the mound ever since the mound distance changed. So I think a lot's going to depend on how those second pitchers can do and how teams can kind of take advantage of those second pitchers.
Yeah, so let's talk about another three-man roster trying to repeat. That's the Great Lakes Gators. And, the only team to ever repeat as champions are the Western Wildcats, who have done it several times. And the Gators, they struggled a bit. We know the conditions weren't great throughout that series, and Chris Cheatham had some trouble with that. But even before that, game 1, Brendan Jorgensen was allowing so many ground ball hits. I've really never seen a game like game 1. You typically see a bunch of home runs, bunch of strikeouts, bunch of walks. It felt like a regular baseball game in some ways, with everybody making contact in the Cobra lineup, getting base hits, getting it, and just knocking runs around. And Jorgensen seemed to struggle, also struggled at the plate a bit. The Gators, of course, had their big win last season. Do you see them potentially taking a step back in 2021?
The Gators, to me, are a very vulnerable team. You got a dominant duo in Jorgensen and Cheatham, but other than that, they don't have a lot of help. They have Zerlag, who's come up clutch a few times at the plate, but still his numbers aren't great. And then they really have no one off the bench. So for the Gators, if Cheatham and Jorgensen just have a little bit of a down year, then they can really turn them into a mediocre team. And last year, we even saw they struggled at the end of the year last year and ended up playing pretty well through the playoffs, and strong performance from Cheatham in the World Series is really what did it for them. And when a sport like wiffleball, when, one player, when you go into the World Series, one player is 33% of your team, and you have a boost like Cheatham did from the regular season to the postseason, it's all going to depend on just how Jorgensen and Cheatham do. And if they take a little bit of a step back this year, then the whole team's going to take a step back with them.
Obviously, early on, we saw them take a little bit of a step back, at least from the offensive portion of the game. And even if you look at it, obviously, through the Baranowski pitching change, through the second game, it was mostly walks that ended up resulting in runs. Do we see this offense picking it up probably within their next series, or do we think they're going to continue to stay right where they are?
I think they'll pick it up a little bit. I think they'll see what's going on and see what they need against the Cobras. You're going into it expecting a lot of those walks. Drew Davis is known for being one of the more wild pitchers in the MLW. When you have a new rookie pitcher like Baranowski, that's another thing you expect for him to be a little wild. So I think their approaches may change a little bit going forward. But like I said, they're a very vulnerable team. So if Cheatham's not on or Jorgensen's not on, I mean, it's going to take both of them, and then they're going to need to get a little help out of Zerlag. So I think they'll take a little bit of a step forward in the upcoming series, but I don't see them having as strong as a year as they did last year.
Yeah, and something else to remember with the Gators, they got off to a slow start last year. It was tough at Colts Field against the Wildcats, and they had trouble getting things sorted out. But I'm just curious, like the Western Wildcats, of course, they've put together a nice roster once again. They've got Nick Saylor, who might turn out to be the best all-around player from that draft class, and did a great job last season. Great home run hitter, great contact hitter, even when he was injured in the postseason. Of course, they've got Kyle Schultz. Where do you see the Wildcats stacking up in a very crowded American League?
Yeah, the Wildcats are my World Series favorite coming into this year. And it's a few reasons. One of the biggest reasons, I touched on it earlier, this year I feel like is a year of the managers, and the decisions they make is going to have a much bigger impact than it's ever had. And Kyle Schultz is definitely the one I trust most out of any of the other managers. The Wildcats have a very diverse roster. Few pieces aren't working, then they have some options. They got Aguilar, who can pitch a little bit. Saylor, I think he's only going to improve on the mound, and you've seen what he can do at the plate already. I'm not sure how much Austin Ford's going to help this year. Purock obviously not on the active roster currently, but I like the progression of Ryan Kelly and his ability to get on base. When you have Kyle Schultz and Nick Saylor, that's all you need out of your third guy. Is just a guy who can be there to walk, and home run hitters like Saylor and Schultz. That's going to be really helpful for them. And I like Schultz, and I trust his ability to play the right three guys and know the right approach to go into with that 6-inning limit rule heading forward. And he's going to have a little bit of an advantage. He was the one that made that rule as the commissioner of the league. So that's why the Wildcats are my World Series favorite.
Well, obviously, too, you mentioned the diversity for the Wildcats. What do you think, though, in terms of that diversity is going to be the most important side, rather if it's offense or necessarily the defensive side, especially pitching, that could potentially push this team towards a championship this year?
Wildcats have something not a lot of other teams have. If their second pitcher isn't doing too well, whether they go with Aguilar or Saylor, they have another option as another second pitcher, which is going to be big for them going forward. And not a lot of other teams even have a decent second pitcher, so that's an advantage for them. And maybe even going forward and some front office moves if they want to, they'd be able to deal one of those, either Saylor or Aguilar. I know they like Saylor a lot, but if a team needs a second pitcher, then that gives the Wildcats a little bit of an advantage.
All right, so last thing, you mentioned the Wildcats coming out of the AL. National League is interesting. We've already talked about the Mallards and the Gators, but of course you have the Eastern Eagles, who are always consistent with Daniel Schultz out there. Drew Davis, when he was just on, was talking about how he is the scariest pitcher he thinks to face in MLW, and of course a great hitter who can hit those clutch and drop the Eagle hammer as well. And then of course with the D-backs, a fan favorite, Jimmy Norp, coming in after a solid rookie season. They got blasted by the Gators in the playoffs and are going to want some revenge. Who do you see coming out of the National League?
I think for the National League, it's the year of the Diamondbacks. And I don't think the National League is anywhere near as strong as the American League, but Jimmy Norp's figured it out. I don't love the Diamondbacks draft pick and schema. That kind of feels like an Eagles effect, like they're kind of just picking their friends, someone they're going to feel comfortable playing with. But who knows, if he can develop, they can be a team with a really nice chemistry, and they already gel together really well with Heath, Norp, and Wilson. And it's a lot of young talent, and heading forward, we saw what they did last year and the progression they had last year. They got off to a little bit of a slow start, but I like them moving forward against, like I said, I think the Gators will take a step back. Eagles, I think, are progressively every year taking a step back. I know they finished first in the NL regular season last year, but that was kind of a weird year and a weird finish to the season. So Diamondbacks are my favorite. All
right. Well, Ben Haller, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for helping us preview this Major League Wiffleball season.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, that'll just about wrap up today's episode of Sports Speak. Once again, a thank you to Coastal Cobras pitcher Drew Davis and MLW analyst Ben Haller for joining us today here on Sports Speak. Tim, just curious, just overall in the sports world, what's one thing you're looking forward to in this next week?
Well, I'll tell you what, in terms of the sports world, it's obviously for me right now a bunch of baseball. I'm really excited to see if the Yankees can finally prove that they're worth something. Obviously, I know they're still playing a series against the Nationals, but we could finally see, Giancarlo Stanton, He was batting Mendoza line numbers just a week and a half ago. And here he is batting above the 300. I know he lost his hitting streak yesterday, but I'll tell you what, Giancarlo is mashing, and I'm loving those MVP chants. Now, I'll also say this too, and I'll say one last thing in regards to what I'm looking forward to in the sports world. I think this weekend, Darlington is going to be a ton of fun. We saw the disaster yesterday in the truck race. And I'm not saying the cup race can be anywhere near that level, but we saw the disaster that was prevalent in that truck race with the massive wrecks on restarts. This track, as it continues to get older and continues to wear, really starts to focus on that high side and being more balanced towards trying to find a car that you can really get to rotate those corners well and having handling, because it's so hard to pass, thus making the bottom side so much more looser, kind of like Bristol when you think about it and how hard it is to handle. And I know two different types of tracks, but very similar scenarios. I think this cup race can be really intriguing. And you think about over past years, Regan Smith, for example, winning. Eric Jones won a Darlington race. People forget about that too. There's so many opportunities that surprise winners. And I think this year's race, especially with it being throwback weekend, is going to be one of the more special races. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see another surprise winner, maybe even a Tyler Reddick. Not saying that's my pick, but maybe even a Tyler Reddick can come away victorious this weekend.
Yeah, Tyler Reddick can really run the wall. Also, drivers like Hamlin, Harvick, Elliott, all still winless, but all very good at Darlington. And I kind of like that the throwback weekend is now Mother's Day weekend. I kind of feel like you kind of get distracted from it when it's in August because the playoff push is going on. Now they can fully embrace it. Also, this is the first weekend in NASCAR where fully vaccinated media are allowed in the garage, so it finally feels somewhat normal. And it's great to return to Darlington again a year after. That was where really sports got back after the pandemic last May. And like you said, with baseball, Giancarlo Stanton has been red hot. These battles have been good. Also really excited for me to watch the NBA. Just 2 more weeks left until the play-in tournament, and great battles, especially shaping up in the Western Conference as the Lakers try to avoid the play-in tournament. The Warriors just try to get into the play-in tournament, including also a big battle in the Eastern Conference between Brooklyn, Philly, and Milwaukee for the #1 seed. But we'll break that all down next week. Until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off here on Sports Speak. We hope you have a great rest of your weekend.